Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our What Now event. I wasn't really sure what to call it, really, because I didn't want you to think that this was a transition event, and I didn't want you to go into panic and think we were starting to talk about schools. So I've kind of called it the What Now event. Last year we did this event, and it was really mostly attended by Year 2s. But interestingly, towards the end of the academic year last year, I had a few Year 1 parents who were interested about what happened next and perhaps hadn't been educated here, or maybe not even in Southwest London, which has its own little climate. But also weren't aware of what the 7, 11 and 13 process was. So this is just a fact finding, a fact gathering. It's absolutely not for you to be thinking about at the moment, but I know that some of you were this time last year. So I just wanted to make sure that you were fully informed as to what we do here to prepare your children and what we do, what happens nationally, really. So first and foremost, the 7+ model, the 11 to 13 debate and the senior school response. So I quite often get asked what the 7+ model, why the 7+ model came about, what exactly that is, and why some schools go to 13 and others go to 11. So I'm going to pretend you're all novices at this, and I hope that you, some of you who obviously do know the system, can bear with me. Historically, at the end of infants, which would have been 7, there were infant schools and there were junior schools across the independent and the state. And so the at age 7 was quite a normal time to transition, I guess. So that was the model that most schools took. They'd open a pre-prep and then they'd have a prep, but not necessarily attached, and much the same as we have here. We've got on 2 sites. We always used to take in and do an assessment at the point of that 7 entry, and we don't do that assessment anymore. And simply because actually what we're intending to do is have our own homegrown from reception all the way through to Year 6. Obviously, we realise that there are mid-year assessments that need to happen. Children will move into the area in Year 3, or they might even move into the area in Year 4, and we assess as we go, and we will always do that. But I'm not going to be doing an assessment at 6 of your children or outside children coming in. So that's gone from our website, which you may see. There are schools in our area still who sit at 7, and you will probably be aware of that. Some of them, this is not exhaustive at all, but the likes of King's, Wimbledon, they do a 7+ model, but that 7+ doesn't get you to King's, it gets you to their prep school, which then sets you, and you then sit for the senior school. And then the same goes for Collet Court, St Paul's, so the same thing applies there. It's their prep for their senior. And there are other schools like Shrewsbury House who take in at 7, and their model is slightly different. So there is a 7 to 13 model, and that is very much based around the boarding schools. So if you definitely are absolutely sure that you want your son to go to Eton because you did, or because that's what you've always dreamed of, you may well choose the 7 to 13 model because you know that your son will board at 13. Now, we do get boarders here at Surbiton, but they're probably, I'd say, 1, maximum 2 a year. And in fact, this year, I don't think we have any down to board for the choices that they're making. Most of the children are local children, and they are looking to do the London day schools for their senior schools, or the Surrey day schools, certainly. So that 7 to 13 is about the journey to boarding, really. Now, there is this myth, this urban myth, that I'm afraid is out there that still continues on, and actually confuses parents. Parents who've perhaps got a child who's a little bit quiet, who might be quite young for their year, might have struggled in the early days at school. They'll think, oh, do you know what? Actually, I'm going to wait to 13 before I transfer them to senior school, because then they'll be a bit more mature and they'll be more ready for school, and they'll probably have a better option of offers. So that's the bit that's not true. I have no doubt about the fact that between 11 and 13, boys mature, of course, girls mature too. But the difference is, if you're sitting, and I'm just going to use a couple of schools as an example. If you were sitting, say, for Hampton, and you knew you wanted Hampton, whether you were going in year 9 for a year 9 start or a year 7 start, you sit the same entry exam at Christmas or around Christmas of year 6. So if you were in a through school that goes all the way through to 7 and 8, you still sit that same exam. So at King's, Wimbledon, you sit the same paper. It's not a different paper. You sit the same paper and you tick on the front whether you are intending to go at 11 or you're intending to go at 13. So the fact that you'd hoped your child would mature in time to sit those exams is not a thing, because actually they still have to sit it at 11 plus. So they still have to sit it when our boys sit it at 11. So then why? What's the merit between 11 and 13? And some schools senior schools used to say, you have been offered a place, you'd sit it at year 6, and you've been offered a place, and this is a conditional offer. You will need to have pass marks in common entrance. So the boys then for year 7 and 8 would do common entrance, and they would pass that and therefore be able to go on to their next school. About 4 or 5 years ago, the likes of Hampton and King's dropped their need to see common entrance results. So whilst they still have a kind of caveat in their letter that says, assuming that you are keeping up the same pace of work, they now don't have any reference to common entrance. So they'll say, you have an offer, you'll sit at 11 plus, and they'll say you have an offer, and you've indicated that you'd like to start in year 9. This offer is absolutely good to go. And they don't. So what the schools used to do, the senior schools used to mark the common entrance papers, and that would be they would definitely know you'd got in. They don't mark it. They don't even want the papers. They don't want the results. So there are a couple of schools that I'm sure still would be interested in the common entrance results, but the common entrance was started many, many years ago as a kind of extension curriculum, which was supposed to bridge the gap between leaving at 11 and sitting GCSEs, and because it's a much broader balance of subjects, and it is quite GCSE content heavy. So it's quite, and most people will say it. I'm not saying anything that most other heads would say. It's quite an archaic curriculum. It's very focused around knowing facts and recounting facts and having that in your memory. So what are the longest rivers in the world? What's the highest mountains in the world for the geography section? Who created this religion, who created that religion, what's the god that you would worship, lots of those sorts of fact-based things. So that's how the common entrance was. There is a lot of debate in the government at the moment, but also in the independent sector, about the merit of common entrance and how long that will last for, because, as I say, it's now not a requirement from senior school. So if you were thinking that 13 might be a good transition for your son, the only time I would see that being a good idea is if you want them to board and you don't want them to board until they're 13. So aside from that, I wouldn't see any benefit, because they're still having to sit. So some of our local prep schools actually won't take you in if they've got a year 7 and 8. They won't take you in at year 7 unless you have already a agreed place for year 9. So that's that kind of debate, and that's, sorry that if I've made that a little bit long-winded. And the senior school response there is exactly that, Hampton and King's, and suggesting now that they don't want to see the common entrance. The prep schools that were traditionally based and very steeped in history were really disappointed about that, because obviously for them it made it quite untenable. And if you look at quite a lot of our schools now, within the IAPS group or within the wider groups nationally, the numbers do reduce at 7 and 8, and all of the things that your boys absolutely love all the way through their school life of fixtures and teams and the big events, actually in 7 and 8 become quite depleted because you're a much smaller group. So that's kind of how the model, and that's the reason I've stopped the 7+ model, and the reason that I strongly believe, unless there's something, I mean, one of our boys last year is going to Eton, but he has applied to go to Cottesmore, which is boarding, and he's going to do 2 years boarding at Cottesmore before he goes on to Eton. So he has a journey that's slightly different, and they do want him to board now, so he's obviously hopping between. So I think there will be some of you that perhaps have individual questions around that. Please put them in the chat box. The chat box is there. Mr. King's on the line. He will ask the questions at the end. So if there is anything that's bespoke to you or that I haven't kind of touched on the model there, please just do ask in the question box, and do it before the end, because as you know, I say it every time, it falls off at the other end of the presentation otherwise, and it looks like I haven't wanted to answer your questions, which is not my motive. So what do we do? Why, how does that journey take you from 1 and 2 up to 6? And, you know, I know when you're choosing a school at 4, some parents very much have it in their mind, well, okay, what's your exit? What's the plan? Other people have no interest in that until we're getting to year 5. We're just still having now our last set of meetings with the year 6s before they give us their final decision on what schools they're applying for. But we will have had probably 4 or 5 different engagement meetings. Mr. King and I, Mrs. Smith, will have had lots of engagement meetings with them just to go through right from the start. Right, these are our results. This is what we're looking at. This is your son. This is what we think. So we've come to that point in the year now. But some of you in year 1 and 2 will start to worry about that, and I don't want you to worry about it, because there's no need. Your son's only just started. There's no need for you to be worrying about that. And I know that anxiety, you can't just switch that off. So hence why I think being transparent and understanding what we do may put your mind at rest. So in terms of the curriculum design, yes, we follow national curriculum, enhanced for English and maths. Yes, we do. Obviously, we're part of the United Learning Group, so we work within that too. Yes, we do plan some of our subjects with the girls' prep. And we try to make that as fun and enriched experience as it can be. What we do very slowly and gradually is that those high expectations are there right from the start. And that's the important part, because what you're doing right from that engagement at early years is helping the children understand the work ethic that's required. And those 3 R's come back so often, but that responsibility of their taking control of their own learning. Some children always will revert back to you as parents. I can't do it. I'm not doing the homework. I can't do it. I don't know what it is. And actually what we say is, okay, bring it back to us. We'll have that discussion with them. Let's see where they're at. And sometimes it is actually just the communication between you, us and them that they need to be aware of, and they're back on the straight and narrow and absolutely fine. So from a curriculum design perspective, we can be really quite imaginative and creative with our curriculum. We've done a lot of work in the last 18 months. We haven't stood still over COVID. We've actually become quite innovative in our curriculum and looking at ways in which inclusion and diversity are represented through language and text and history. We've been looking through how our physical development is mapped. So one of the things that I feel really strongly about, and you may have heard me talk about in the past, is that actually a child's physical development is very much sitting on the other side of the seesaw to their academic ability. And it's really important that you address that physical development for various reasons. So a child who perhaps struggles with the more academic side of their learning could be for all sorts of reasons, but often when you track back and you ask them, I'll sit and ask parents, okay, well, did they crawl? Can they swim? Do they cycle? All of that involves crossing that central line in their physical development, and they may well have struggled with all of that balance. If your child has, and not every child is this, but if your child has gone straight from bum shuffling to walking, and haven't done that bilateral movement, often that makes it more tricky when they're reading, when they're writing, because that's that transfer of information that goes across both sides of the brain. So we work really, right from the beginning, that needs addressing. And Mr. Blood has put a pathway document together, which you've probably seen on the website and is around the school, about the engagement that the boys can have right from the start. And that is the absolute reason why Mr. Blood and his team are involved with them right from reception. So yes, of course, he loves leading the teams out at fixtures, but actually he fully understands that the growth has to be right from reception, and those picking up on those skills and picking up on those children who perhaps find it more challenging. It not only addresses the confidence in the curriculum and their academic ability, but it also helps with that cross-referencing of the brain. The critical thinking is one key area that I think is really quite important, and I kind of alluded to it when I talked about the common entrance. For me, if you look at our learners today, the jobs that they will go into have not been created yet, lots of them. And actually there was a shocking statistic last week, and I probably won't quite get this right, but for those children that are born from 2019, those children that are born then have something like a 95% chance of living to 100. So if that's the case, loving learning and loving work is really going to be important. So fostering that absolute passion for learning and understanding that you're responsible for that learning is something that we want to instill in them right from the start. So in reception in year 1 and year 2, that opportunity to take control of their learning, to have that self-select opportunity within the classroom, to make sure that they're thinking critically about how they're going to get to the problem and how they're going to help themselves, is really it is critical. It's very critical in their critical thinking, and that helps them and aids them through that whole process of that pathway up through the year groups. And we try to look at, and we've just had this in a staff meeting just recently, we've talked about what's the essence of each year group. And so the essence of reception is absolutely settling into school life. It's about embedding that the personal, social and emotional needs, but also giving them that sense of awe and wonder that we want them to feel captured and captivated in their learning, in order to use all of those skills that they learn to progress through to year 1 and then the transition into year 2. In year 1, they always find the first 3 or 4 weeks of year 1 a little bit tricky. It's just a balance of settling themselves. It doesn't matter which school you go to, by the way. That transition from reception to year 1 is always significant. They've moved away from the early years foundation stage to the Key Stage 1 curriculum. They are a little bit discombobulated, to say the least, at that point. They're just settling really well, actually. Year 1s, we're really, really happy with them. But it's not about capabilities. This group of year 1s are a really capable bunch, absolutely. But it's just the routines and the practices, and it's about their adaptation and agility. We've talked a lot in the last 18 months about agility and being able to move between one method of learning to another. And, you know, your children were incredible in that. When I tell people that are outside of education how our 4 and 5-year-olds were engaged in learning all day long, they cannot quite believe it. And if I'm honest, do I see a recovery program required for year 1 and year 2? No, I don't. They have actually done brilliantly. I see more of a recovery needed at reception level, because they spent the whole of last year not being able to be at nursery. So any structural routine has really been very, very disruptive for them. So that critical thinking aspect helps us with that mechanical processes. And you've got to approach it when you're learning to read. You learn to read through picture cues, through your phonics and your blending and your digraphs and your trigraphs, which I'm sure has all become new to you as parents in the last couple of years. And you also learn through your whole word recognition. You're drawing from a wider language, a contextual bed, a much greater context. And it's not dissimilar with the way we want to teach them how to learn in other aspects. So the reason that we do press quite hard on the things like times table rock stars or number families or number bonds is that actually when you commit that to memory and it becomes a mechanical process, it aids the critical thinking and the problem solving that you then need to do with it, and it gives you the conduit to go. And lastly, what I do think is really key, and it's so interesting when you look at a journey from 4 to 18 of a child, and in fact into the early adulthood, of how important those stages and stepping stones of relationship building are. And the reason I'm always so fond of that journey from 4 to 11, selfishly, from a very selfish point of view, is it's incredible to see the development that is made in a child that comes into you in reception not much more than toddler, to leaving you at 11 as an accomplished, articulate, incredibly gifted and talented child going off to find their senior schools. And that progress in prep level is quite incredible. But those relationships are, I think we sometimes, and maybe COVID has helped us in that way, it has made us realise how vital that relationship building is. I think when you look at adults in your life that perhaps have had difficulties along the way, maybe academically, maybe in their work life, often they are deep rooted to not having secure relationships where they feel safe and able to ask those questions and to look at that whole learning profile. When you talk to adults, young adults that are perhaps suffering with either mental health or loneliness or aspects of that whole mental health and well-being, it will often track back to incidents and events within their early life where they had adverse childhood experiences, and that could be bullying, that could be a bereavement. There's lots of those adverse childhood experiences, so that relationship building is critical, and I think we do that really well. We're always talking about the children, and we're always looking for how we can best help their tailored provision and look at their bespoke journey through the school. So what I'm going to show you now is a little bit of, oh, have I moved somebody over there? Something's clicked on my screen. What you should see in front of you now is our 10+ and 11+ pathway. So one of the things that parents don't often realise is that there is a 10+ exam assessment that you can take to, and it's only a few schools that do it, but we do have quite a few children that will do the 10+, say to Hampton or Kingston Grammar. Not all guaranteed to get in at all, but then will leave us again, obviously for year 7, so they get a deferred place, if you like. If you look at what we do from year 3, and we're preparing them all the way through with the curriculum and our expectations, but if you look at the what we do here in year 3, so you have assessments which help. Quite often you'll hear us talk about CAT tests. These are cognitive ability tests, and we sit them in year 3 and year 5. They're a non-verbal and quantitative and verbal reasoning. They supposedly set your innate ability. What we find at year 3 is it's a little bit of a bum fight, and they haven't perhaps seen that way of assessing before, and it's a new thing, and we don't rely that heavily on those results, but they are an indicator all the same. The teaching around that is going on all the time, the interventions within the school day. We've got a thread coming through, in fact, all the way through now, right the way from reception, on oracy and just being able to present to yourself. And we introduce mentoring into year 3. There's a senior school forum in that time, and we will look to you for very much buying in with us on that regular reading, and that just completing the homework really. In year 4, we then, obviously still have the termly assessments. We are precision teaching at that point, so we will have there's a specialist model then. Obviously in year 3, most of the time the children are taught by their form teacher, and they move into year 4 and they still have quite a lot of their lessons will be taught by their form teacher, but they will also have English and maths specialist teachers as well. They have the mentoring continuing then. We start to meet in that spring term of year 4, anybody that is interested in the 10+, and we talk to them about that journey. The 10+ is an interesting thread, and I'm very happy to answer questions on that should you wish, but it's not particularly relevant to necessarily everybody. In year 5, we then repeat the CATS tests, and the CAT tests are a good indicator for us as a school. You sit at a national average of just under 100, is seen as a standardised score, and we will look at what their CAT test result is and compare it with their PIRA and their PUMA, which is our termly assessments in reading and maths. And there we have a really good, and Mr. King's just brought into a really good tracking, well, he tells me it's really good, I'm hoping it is, a tracking document, which a piece of software where we will be able to track right from the start, because at the moment we're relying very much on that data being on Excel spreadsheets, but we will be able to track them throughout, and that's so helpful. We have meetings every fortnight all the way through from reception to year 6, where we talk about the children in all the children in each class, about where they're at, where we're heading with them, what we want to do for target setting, if they need any support, are they a bit wobbly, their pastoral and well-being is all covered in those fortnightly meetings, but that goes right the way through from reception to year 6. We have in year 5, then we'll have academic enrichment classes for the 10+ if you are doing that, and interview practice for that. And then there's quite a lot of visits happen in the year 5, so we'll say to you, go and have a look, so you've got a good idea of what you're looking at. And in the summertime, we obviously will leave them with preparation because what happens at the end of year 5 is they are very soon back to school in September, and will be sitting exams in November, December and January, depending on what schools you're going for. And at the moment, they're spreading themselves between sort of December and January. Places like Tiffin, and the grammar schools that are attached to that, so Sutton Grammar, Wilson's, you need to apply to them in the May or June of the year, so that's right ahead of the game. But most of them are putting their applications in now and they're in year 6, and they're putting their applications in now, and they will be assessed in either December or January. So then in year 6, we obviously, with this week is our mock exam week, just to get them ready. We've had lots of communication with parents by this time. We've had academic enrichment classes. We've had our mindfulness drop-in sessions. We've got some children in interventions, potentially at this point for other reasons. There's lots of work going on. In terms of interview practice, we do lots of that throughout mentoring and lots of that oracy work, but we will also then begin to hone down on some of those interview questions, some of those more often used questions. And we work with you all the way through that. It's really important that we keep that close relationship going with you all the way through. And obviously you can see that I've put the last 2 years worth of data in this next slide, or the slide and then the slide after, just to give you an overview on how each cohort is very different actually. So this was our destination schools last academic year, so not the one just gone, the one before, and you can see there were 41 pupils, so they were a big year group, much the same as this year 6 actually. They were a very capable bunch, and sometimes it's incredible how you have a cohort sometimes that are just incredibly capable, and this is certainly very, very helpful. You know, Mr. King often talks about the fact that we have our differentiated groups in class, so most activities are differentiated 3 ways, some 4, but actually often if you're teaching to that top level, those children that I know not very personally call my key marginal children, who sort of sit teetering on that edge, often lift up onto that next level because their peers are challenging them, and there's a peer sort of aspect of that, helping each other, nudging each other along. So there we have put, and we haven't got this data of number applied and number offers on the next slide, although I will get that to you. I've only got the where they actually went and destination, but you can see here, so we had 25 applied for Claremont and 23 offers, and actually in terms of how many of them went, there was 4 that went that year. So you can see some of the schools will have lots of applicants and some of them will have less as you go, and that depends very much on at what level you are looking at, whether you're looking at those very highly academic schools, or whether you are looking for an all-round. You might be looking for a scholarship. You can see we had an awful lot of scholarships that year. That was a really good year. They were an really interesting year 6 group, but they did very, very well in terms of their destinations. They sat on average about 10 points above, and obviously not strictly true for every individual, about 10 points above the next cohort. So the next cohort, you know that this is all recorded, so you are able to look back on this. The next cohort were only 22 children, and they went to a whole host of different schools, and you can see there's much more of them going 1s and 2s at that stage, and really interesting. I felt very content actually. There was one boy that I would have liked to have seen last year go to a different school, but unfortunately he sat his 3 schools under 1 exam because it was COVID and it was online. So it was a most unusual year this year of 22. We've got a massive spread this academic year, so we've got 41 pupils again, and there's a big mix. They are they're probably sitting even higher than the cohort from 2 years ago. So there's a good, you can see that year on year it differs hugely, and it is very dependent on the year group at the time. For me, it's much more important that we are giving you and working together as a group, but giving you absolute real-time evidence of what type of work ethic they've got, where they would suit, and that they end up at the best school. I'm sure you've heard that there's lots of data to suggest that actually being happy in your school, first and foremost, brings success. So if you have been, and I've seen this in the girls' system, where children have been tutored and crammed within an inch of their life to get to a given school, and they get to that given school and it's a struggle, and it's a struggle not just for the first year, but it continues to be a struggle. And actually that does then mean that you don't end up with the results at the end of that. So if you're looking at GCSEs and A levels being your deciding factor, when you're looking at senior schools, you need to be looking at the value added, because you see there from their results actually how much progress and development they make in that time. If you have been tutored up to that point, actually that is a very difficult journey for you. And I'm not so sure why any of us would want that journey for our children now, with the heightened evidence of mental health and well-being, why any of us would want that journey if that child wasn't going to thrive in that environment. So that is very much down to us having those honest discussions, you having honest discussions with us, and vice versa. So I think I've non-stop talked for, oh my goodness, 35 minutes. So I am going to open up to ask if there are any questions at all.
Good evening, everyone. And yes, Mrs. Chong, there are a couple of questions. The first one was just around the 7+ exam, and would they factor in age variances with some kids being older and some being very young, like August-born children?
It depends where you're applying to at 7, to be honest. That sometimes they'll do an age standardized score. Some schools it will just be a straightforward, and that is very much, and I know this is really mean to say this, but that is very much about whether they have spaces. If you are a very oversubscribed school, you will find that it's a score and it's a score, that's it. There's no leeway. Actually, that's kind of what the 10+ is like as well for us. So for the 11+, there's much more qualitative work goes on. Mrs. Smith gets involved and engaged with the schools very, very early on. Our references are very lengthy. I mean, they are for 10+ too, but the schools just want the benchmark at 10+. They just want you to have reached a score. And that quite often happens with the 7+. If there are specific schools and you want to talk to me about those at any point, do please organise a meeting with Mrs. Smith and I, and we can talk you through that. I think what I've had happen in the last couple of years is just that moving on at 7, and actually I've had 2 children actually who've come back and come back to us because perhaps it wasn't quite. Some people try to do it to escape the 11+, and actually at 6 it's much harder to assess at 6 than it is at 11.
Right. There was a question around when you would consider 10+. I suppose you did mention there that is the benchmark's very high, because the question was around, is it only suitable for academically gifted children?
It depends which school. So Kingston Grammar and Hampton, yes. St James in Ashford do a 10+ assessment too, and that would be much less challenging academically. So it's not necessarily dependent on that, but they are the most common ones that our boys sit. So for example, 10 of our boys sat Hampton for 10+ last year, and 5 of them got it, 3 of them shouldn't have sat it, and 2 of them will get it this year. So it's interesting. What we don't recommend is if your child is in any way wobbly, slightly anxious, or perhaps has only just reached that kind of level where they've just come to the table to work, if you like, we try to say to you, we'll ask you, do you think they'll cope if they get knocked back? Because if they get knocked back at that point, and we have to then spend the next 6 to 8 months picking them back up, that's wasted time that we could be spent preparing them for the 11+, where they could get a whole range of schools and they could have a choice. So we work together with you on that. Some parents say, let's give it a go, and we'll be very much along the lines of, let's give it a go, see how it goes, but it doesn't matter if you do, it's fine. And sometimes that works for some children, but you know your own children well enough to know that that would work for some, but not for all.
Great. There was just a question around, is there merit in allowing boys to mature in a prep school, in years 7 and 8, before transitioning to a senior school?
Oh, sorry, I thought I had kind of covered that at the beginning. Apologies. Well, so you can only, if you've sat at year 6, you have to sit the exams at year 6. So actually, you're not allowing them to mature in order to get them into a school later down the line, if you know what I mean. They have to get to that 11+ level at year 6 in order to move at year 7 or year 9. So I'm not sure why you would then choose a prep school to mature between 7 and 8 when they could actually be spending their first year at senior school at 7 and grow into that before they then start choosing GCSEs. And one of the things that happens at year 9, and you know, my son did it because I was at Newlands House at the time it went through. I can't lie, school fees made a big difference for me on that. But I ended up at him going in at year 9, and before you knew it, he hadn't really had time to settle socially, and he was choosing GCSEs. So actually, there's a maturity that the debate. It very much depends on your individual children, but actually, not really. You don't have time to mature because you've still got to sit at year 6 at Christmas.
Great. And then just a question around grammar schools, and obviously those schools that are highly academic. So do we feel that external tuition is required over and above the learning at school?
So it's really interesting. I'm sure you'll know, in the kind of Southwest London bubble, the people that get paid the best are the Tiffin tutors, because they are incredibly, they'll have queues for you for 6 years. We teach, and Mr. King can back this up too, we teach above the assessment level. What happens at Tiffin is that they will sit, and Sutton and Wilson's, they will be expecting a CAT test type standardized score of about 130 for most of their children. Now, we probably have, and this year we've got a whole group of boys that could probably get Tiffin. They sit a first stage, which is very much around the peeling off, because they have a lot apply, and then they sit the second stage. It's very rigid, and actually it's not for the faint-hearted, really. So tutoring wouldn't help so much in, we do already in our 10+ and 11+, lots of question, you know, lots of paper questions, lots of opportunities to really think beyond, really dig deep in the inference and deduction for the English or the verbal reasoning. We're teaching verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning right from year 3, so it's not alien to them. By the time they're getting assessed on that in a paper, they've done it for 3 years. So my personal opinion is, and that is just a personal opinion, when you have invested in an independent curriculum and an independent school to put on top for tutoring, it is, I think, quite unnecessary. You will get certain children who actually, maybe their story writing is taking quite a long time to come to the fore, and they're really strong in maths, and they're looking for quite a challenging academic school, and we've all agreed that they might benefit from 4 weeks of one-to-one teaching in creative writing, and we would have those conversations with you. But certainly from my experience, it's not it's not a given, and it's not a golden ticket for sure.
Great. I've responded to a couple of questions directly as well. I think one that's definitely relevant to everyone is just around, you know, COVID and lockdown, and, you know, do we feel that we've had to play catch up at all with any of the boys as a result of the pandemic?
So no, actually, as I said earlier, I think the biggest year group for recovery is reception. They haven't had a nursery experience, and they have been, you know, either at home with their parents or mostly at home with their parents, when, you know, 60% of our parents both work. So you are left with a year group of children who probably haven't had those boundaries, the new sort of understanding of what it's like to be even in a preschool year. So I'd say we were doing quite a lot of social, personal social work with the reception, and we just talked about it today in one of our meetings, actually, that I would imagine we're 3 to 4 weeks away from where we would have been this time last year. because if you think about it, reception last year didn't have as disrupted a year. They did have a bit of a disrupted year, but not as bad in terms of before they came to school. Every year group, other than that, Mr. King will tell you, the data shows that they have made progress all the way through. We are way above national average with, and all of the boys are reaching age expected, and if not greater depth. So, you know, quite a high percentage against our United Learning groups, and nationally we are quite ahead of the curve there. So we haven't seen any enormous dips. One thing that we've put quite a lot of effort into, and we were actually, it was on our strat plan, but one of the things that we did find is their pleasure in reading and reading for pleasure outside of school. And sometimes, you know, what we're looking for from the boys, certainly further up, is that opportunity to bring that real language, that really rich vocabulary into their writing. And actually some of the boys had really missed out on that. So we have had a real push on the reading. Other than that, Mr. King, would you agree? I don't think we haven't really found any academic catch up really.
No, definitely not. And I think that the key thing is progress for us. As long as we can, you know, hand on heart say that the boys are making progress, both, you know, in their reading and maths assessments, but then obviously also pastorally, then we've been happy. And so we kind of noticed straight after the first lockdown, we assessed the boys and we actually noticed that they had made really good progress because they were able to get some sort of one-on-one or small group support that they perhaps wouldn't otherwise have got in school. So it just provided a different way of learning for them, which was great. And certainly we've taken a lot of lessons for that and applying them in our timetable date for each week now, really. The rest of the questions I've actually just been responding to back and forth, so I think that's it for now, Mrs. Chong.
Can I just finish on one thing? I know I touched on how important the physical development is. One of the things that you will see across, you know, potentially across other schools by the time that the boys are getting to year 5 and 6, and particularly in that first term of year 6 and the last term of year 5, you'll see fixtures drop, and you'll see one of the PE and games slots dropped, and you'll see one of the music slots dropped for enrichment activities or actually paper practice. And we don't do that. I think it's vitally important that the boys enjoy their whole experience of learning. We don't find it correlates that they, by having an extra half an hour of something, they benefit, but it does correlate that having that fixture or that half an hour. They missed out on that actually, and that was something I haven't touched on. The recovery program in terms of the physical development and fixtures, oh wow, they have been just unbelievable going back to fixtures. The boys have been super excited and just unbelievably well behaved because they are so excited. So that's one of the things that I think is really important, that you keep that balance. And you know, when you talk to the senior heads about what they love about Surbiton boys is they always talk about that level of interest, that passion for learning, and that, I mean, exemplary in their behaviour, which is quite, you know, when you see at a party some of your children running around, or you see them out in the playground, you think, really? Did that really happen? Are they really that well behaved? They really are. They're actually quite incredible. So in terms of the balance, we try to keep that balance all the way through. If I'm really honest, if the stress and the anxiety of any of these transitions is the parents, and I know that because I've been one and I remember it well, and it doesn't matter how many times you told me not to be stressed about it, I was still stressed about it. And I think the only way that we can help with that is giving with lots of communication, and the boys do not feel it. I've just done with the year 6 boys a little survey of asking them, you know, what 5 things, you know, what's their favorite film, what's their favorite food, what's their biggest worry. And interestingly, their biggest worry is it's not what school I'm going to get into, or I'm worried about my 11+, is I'm worried about what my parents will think. And actually, I remember that. I know that that was the case, certainly for my children. So we try to manage that really well for them, so that it's not a big deal for them, and that it's much more taking it in their stride. They know that they're very well prepared for these exams, and they know what to expect. It's just us as bystanders. It's probably the first time in our children's lives where we actually can't step in and do it for them almost. So it's a really difficult transition for us as a parent, that kind of, oh, it's up to you now. But they're so well prepared that actually it is them taking it in their stride. Sorry to add that on. I just had thought that I probably hadn't touched on that.
Great. Well, Mrs. Chong, yeah, I think I've just questions, like I said, privately, and you've answered the majority of them. And one comment just said, brilliant, the session was so useful, helps us to allay the anxiety. Yeah,
well, please don't sit there and worry. You know, I know that I remember it well, as I say, but you mustn't. But I'm not just talking about transition to other school, you know, to mapping the pathway. I'm talking about just general school worries. Please do not let them fester. Please do get in touch with your form teacher. You know, if it's more curriculum based, Mr. King will be able to help. If it's more welfare and well-being based, Mrs. Johnson will also be able to help. But we are all here for that reason. So please don't ever sit back and worry about something that actually, once you've spoken about it, it will feel much better. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I hope it was useful. It is available. It will come through as a link for anyone that has missed it. And keep well and keep safe. Thank you.